Okay. It should be going live.
Did I lose? It says we're live, but I suddenly can't hear anything. Now you're dropping out.
Yeah.
Am I the only one on? Apparently we lost our hosts and I'm suddenly here alone. So I'm not sure what's going on. I have been told by a friend of mine that I can be seen. The folks from Critical Blast suddenly froze and then vanished, and suddenly I had the screen all to myself. This will make an interview a little more difficult because I'm going to feel kind of self-conscious interviewing myself. I have a friend watching who just texted me and said that he didn't see any place to enter comments. Maybe that comes with the folks from Critical Blast. There is a live comments column to the right, but I don't have access to that. Watching my email, hoping something new shows up from Critical Blast. I suppose I should be doing something, but I'm honest to say I don't know exactly what. They were going to talk to me about my work in comic books. I was hoping to talk a bit about my... looks like they're coming back. I hope. Okay, I can see you, RJ. Okay. I could hear you.
Me now too.
Yay. I was well, not sure what I was going to do.
I've got a PC here that I believe is I don't know, 47 years in PC years. It's about 5.
Okay.
So
I understand.
it is on its last legs, and it's starting to show its age. Welcome for who've been watching. Where the heck RJ is? We're talking here today. Comics. Our host is in the other room because it's his birthday, and he's had a few. He's in the back of the store. He's not running it. That's fine. But this is our monthly broadcast live from Cosmic Comics. And for our guest, we have Mr. Henry Vogel. Now, for all you comic book fans who are thinking that this whole indie comics movement is really cool and really new and fresh, we hate to put this to you. Mr. Vogel's been doing indie comics from before.
You're fading in and out now. If we need
I've
to, got it?
Yeah. I thought I might be. Well, I've done nothing.
Well, if worse comes, yes. Or not.
Okay, I only got one thing running on here. That should be fun.
That is Southern Nights number 3.
We had strong connection.
Yeah, I'm
Number 3.
way back in the days before Dave Kraft and Comics Interview took over the publishing side of things, when David Willis and I were doing that.
Now, we started the Crusaders for one issue. What prompted the change?
What was the name of the comic book company? There was, we got a letter after the first issue came out from whoever it was. I think they were associated with Archie or Charlton or something, but they were resurrecting a long-standing comic of theirs called The Mighty Crusaders. And they informed us that was their trademark, and we were we should find something new to call our comic book. They were, they didn't threaten a lawsuit or anything like that, and we didn't fight them against it, because in the long run, while we did have a little bit of panic trying to figure out what to call the book, Southern Nights was a much better title, so we were happy with that. And we even wrote it into the second issue, the change, where there was a letter sent to what became the Southern Nights saying, nope, that's we already have a trademark for the Crusader. You can't use it anymore. So we tried to have fun.
The second issue here. I've got the second issue reprinted as a first Halloween special issue.
Yep, that's it. I should have thought a little in advance and gotten a few copies out of my my boxes, and I could have shown those. But yes, that was the introduction of Dredd, who was sort of a recurring villain. We had him come back in issue 14 or 15, I think. So, but that
the hole in my stack. I go from 13 to 16.
Yeah.
Okay, well, but you were right. I look at all the indie comic stuff that's going on these days, and being part of the indie book publishing side of things these days, I look at that and like, no, we were doing this stuff. The first issue came out in 1982, and we were hardly the first indie comic book to come out. I mean, ElfQuest was already running. Cerebus had been going for a good while.
Oh yeah, it was a Renaissance period.
I loved the 80s. It was a great time to be a comic book fan. You could find interesting, fascinating superhero books. I'd like to think we had one of those. You could find stuff like Cerebus, which would have never fit in the previous. Excuse me, I have a cat clawing at me. She just wanted a little attention.
I heard that.
Yeah. So, you know, if you see a strange tail or something, it's not my pet Cthulhu at work. It's just the cat. She usually doesn't jump up on tables, so we'll probably be good. But there were a lot of books coming out that you wouldn't have seen. You know, Nexus, Badger. I don't think anybody but First or Capital Comics before them would have done either of those books. So a lot of great stuff.
How did you go about getting the book put together and published? I mean, the Guild, I'm assuming that was your own imprint.
That was. Okay, so the story behind that is that in 1981, I went back to college. I had dropped out of Clemson University. I returned to Clemson University and was wandering about just before classes started and came across a kiosk, and someone who's listening, specifically David Willis, had come to Clemson as a freshman and was a big comic book fan, and he had posted signs with you know, the standard thing you used to see in college with the tear off phone numbers and all. Are you interested in comic books and comic book collecting? If so, call this. He was trying to get a comic book club going, which we did have for a while, but we met, got to talking, thought it would be a lot of fun to do a comic book as part of the club. And over the next few months, I came up with what became the Southern Knights. First had Electrode, who was just planned to be exactly what he was, a standard comic book style hero, the genius who turns himself into a superhero and goes out to fight crime and evil. And then came up with, I really don't remember which order I came up with them in. Dragon, Kristen, and I think Kristen was the last one of the bunch. And Connie, who I came up with after watching the 1981 release Heavy Metal and the section of Tarna the Trakian, who wandered around with a sword slicing people up. And I thought, you know, why don't we have a villain or a hero who has a sword who actually gets to use the sword? Because there was Valkyrie from Marvel, but all she did was whack people with the flat of her blade. She never actually stabbed them or sliced them. And the big challenge was coming up with a way to have her use the sword without becoming a mass murderer who was slicing people into little bitty pieces. And I pulled in a bit from Edgar Rice Burroughs' fourth Mars book, Thuvia, Maid of Mars, where there was a group with vast mental powers who projected the idea of weapons that would hit someone, and because of their mental, they thought they were really being hit by a weapon, they would keel over dead. I kind of translated that into your basic psychic powers, but that gave us sort of having your cake and eating it too, with a sword that could be used without slicing people up into little bitty pieces.
You know, that's a theme now in the Wonder Woman comic. She's carrying a sword all the time, and you know she's got to be using it somewhere.
There wouldn't be much reason for her to do so otherwise, which was my big problem. And I admit that at some point Marvel did switch I may be misremembering this. I think Dave Kraft used to write the Defenders, and he was going to replace Valkyrie's sword with a quarterstaff for exactly the same reason that I said the sword looked kind of stupid, because she was wandering around using a sword without actually using the sword. Why bother having something like that if all you're going to do is whack people?
Well, you never know if you're going to have to pry open a treasure chest lid.
There is that. But then the quarterstaff can serve as a 10-foot pole in the dungeon, so you never know. Showing my role-playing background there. But when to return to the story, when we sort of settled on the setup for the Southern Knights, I presented it to David and David Willis, not David Kraft. We had too many Davids, no offense, guys, involved in the book. But when I presented them to David Willis, he thought they were great ideas and agreed with me when I said, yeah, I don't want to turn them over to our friends in the club. I'd honestly rather do it myself if we can find a way and find the money. David said, well, how much would it cost? And this is where I have to go backwards a bit. In the late 70s, I co-edited and financed the publication of a short-lived science fiction magazine called Eternity Science Fiction. We managed to produce 2 issues and had a third that was ready to go when somebody broke into my partner's car and stole it. They stole the layouts. It was like, why did you steal the layouts? What good will it do you? Probably nothing. They just grabbed something and ran. But the laid out stories ended up probably in a nearby dumpster, and we ended up going under. But I learned enough about working with publishers and what would be required to get this going to feel confident that we could do it with a comic book. And to my surprise, when I told David, yeah, we could probably do it for $2,000, he said, I've got $2,000. And next thing I knew, we were writing a comic book. David found
The thing is, I'm talking about the early 80s when $2,000 was real money.
Oh, it was a lot of money. I was, to put things in perspective, David was 18. If my parents would have smacked down that idea if I'd come at him at 18 with the idea, but David's parents were fully supportive. Mine couldn't say anything. I was 24 and married by the time we did this, so they were supportive too. They didn't try to stop us. They were supportive of everything that we were doing. But I suspect if I'd tried that at 18, they would have tried very hard to talk me out of wasting $2,000. Fortunately, David's parents were much more open-minded to the idea. And again, go ahead.
It seems to have been a very successful idea because you went for a full 36 issues here.
We did. We ran for,
which is not bad for an indie.
At the time we stopped, the only books that had been running, black and white books that had been running longer than us, were Cerebus, and I guess there was a book called Ms. Tree that was, it wasn't exactly black and white. They published in sort of black, white, and another color. It was Max Collins was the writer. So they had been running longer than us. But as far as black and white went, ElfQuest ended up running longer than us, obviously, but at the time they had not. So we ran a really good run.
A couple of Turtles that did pretty good.
Yes. The Turtles came along 84, I think, maybe. So they did quite well. And I got to hand it to them. Brilliant name, well marketed. I'm going to commit heresy here. I did not dislike the early issues of the Turtles. I thought they were They were kind of clever, but I didn't think they were anything special. If it wasn't for the title and the fact that they were turtles, I'm not sure they would have succeeded quite as well. But brilliant.
It was successful enough that there were a handful of titles that I can recall that tried to glom onto that whole bandwagon of 3 adjectives and a noun,
and we were
and just trying to ride the. And yes, you were one of them with the aristocratic extraterrestrial time-traveling thieves. With this is some absolutely good Mark Probst artwork on this thing.
Oh yes,
I was in college. I was reading these, and Bianca was one of my pinup girls. So
we had a fan in Atlanta we saw at conventions fairly regularly, and he kept trying to get Mark to draw a nude Bianca for him, and Mark steadfastly refused to do it. He was very disappointed at that. So
good for Mark.
Yes, but
because then she's just another woman.
Yes, exactly. It was it was the history of the X-Thieves, which of course we shortened it to X-Thieves fairly quickly, and then we kind of glommed off of X-Men at the time. But still, the history of X-Thieves was by the time Mark was drawing the Southern Knights, we had sort of a working weekend in the Georgia mountains, which is where David Kraft lived. He lived on top of, actually lives on top of Screamer Mountain in Clayton, Georgia. And Mark flew up from Florida and I drove down from South Carolina, and we were working on plotting and planning story arcs. And that Saturday afternoon, we were sitting around. Dak got a phone call and was dealing with publishing stuff, I think. I'm not sure, but he was on the phone for a long time. And Mark, being the introverted artist that he was just sitting there drawing away, working on Southern Knights issue. And I was bored to tears. So I started looking through a portfolio of artwork that Mark brought and found his initial drawing of the characters that became Fred and Bianca. And I looked over at Mark and I said, well, God, who are these guys? I love these guys. Who are they? And he's like, I just drew them to show I could do, to show versatility. And being a writer, I couldn't leave it at that. So I spent the next hour planning out who they were, what they were doing. And by the time Dave Kraft got off the phone, I said, all right, this is what we're going to do next. And I sort of presented the idea of the thieving, the intergalactic time-traveling thieves to him. We started brainstorming back and forth and pretty much had the first issue and had their backstory and who their villains were by the end of the weekend. And we had a lot of fun with it.
Well, it was a very fun title because more than Southern Knights was what I liked about Southern Knights, and there's nothing I disliked about Southern Knights, to be honest with you. You had a very good mix of characters. It wasn't just, hey, we're different superheroes. You had a mythical creature, you had the superhero creature, you had just Kristen. Kristen's just strong. She's Kristen. Did you ever give her a superhero name or costume, or just
never?
Kristen.
Never. She was just Kristen. She refused to have one. We wrote that in. They kept trying to come up with something for her, and she refused to take one, and managed to keep Connie from getting one too. Not that Dragon's superhero name was all that particularly original, but it was descriptive.
It's kind of like a talking dog named Dog.
Yes, more or less.
She did get out of the Clemson Tiger shirt for a while there and get into a kind of a hard.
It was sort of the initial drawing of the Southern Knights, which hangs on David Willis's wall, was done by Butch Geiss. I was talking to him on the phone, describing the characters to him, and he, he knew David and I were at Clemson. 1981 happened to be the first year Clemson won a national championship in football. And so just, he was just up the road in Asheville. He was very familiar with Clemson. And so he drew Kristen in orange shorts and a white shirt with a tiger paw on the breast. And at a certain point, that almost became her costume. I think yep. So they would draw her in that costume, and I would say that's fine. Put her in the Clemson outfit if you want to, but feel free to draw something else if you want. And Connie, who was an athlete, technically had a costume in the second issue that she basically never wore. That's because Butch had drawn her in that costume when he was initially creating that first drawing. He had provided her with an interesting sort of purple, that one, yes, that costume there. And she would put it on periodically, but as often she would just show up in athletic clothing because she was a fencer. So
now we've talked about Trode and Connie and Kristen. I keep forgetting about this fellow over here.
Aramis. Yep. Aramis was David Willis's idea. He came up with the idea of introducing a character from way in the past who was sort of magically hidden away inside what was the mansion that the Southern Knights lived in, the Hampton House. We called it. I don't remember why we called it the Hampton House, but that's neither here nor there. And so we once again, David had the basic idea of a magical person, and we sort of brainstormed what we needed to do. And I learned a lot over the years writing that, how not to write magical characters. We did not outline or provide a set of limits to him. And so at least once or twice I broke the rules that you shouldn't ever break when writing a magic character by basically inventing the thing that gets them out of trouble, because that's something the mage can do. But he dated back.
Of course you do. That's the Deus Ex Machina.
Exactly. Or Deus Ex Machina in this case, I guess. But yes. So he was technically, based on his date of birth, he was a couple of 100 years old, but he had been under magical suspended animation for most of that time and was physically about 16. So there was a lot of back and forth about not taking him out because he was a minor, and that would have been, endangering a minor to let him adventure. So he had to sort of horn his way in on some of the fights or teleport in a couple of times and join in. It was an interesting sort of, something atypical.
Now, I have not gone through the entire thing again, but when their tagline was that they were the #1 super team of the South. Which of course begs the question, who was the #2 super team of the South, and were there other super teams operating out there other than like Synergy? I know Synergy was operating out there.
Well, that was a tagline that David Kraft came up with. He said, we've got to have something that we can use as a tagline, and that was a perfectly good one. The reason we set the Southern Knights in Atlanta, like I say, we were a couple of hours up I-85 from Atlanta in Clemson. So trips to Atlanta were common occurrences for us, and it was the largest nearby city that we thought was big enough to warrant a superhero team. Looking at the Marvel and DC universe, why would anybody ever bother, at least from a criminal point of view, why would you go to New York? I mean, there's a superhero every other block. So we thought we'd set up in Atlanta because, I mean, bluntly put, there were no Southern superheroes except for some of those, like Razorback in Marvel, who always irritated the crap out of me because he talked like an idiot and was always hot-headed, and he was somebody's idea of the way a Southerner would be if he got himself some superpowers. So we were trying to show that, the South is not full of rednecks and people that talk like Jimmy Carter, who was president at the time. So
and you didn't have superheroes that were named like Moonshine or Captain Confederacy.
Right, exactly. And I remember Captain Confederacy, which kind of got a bad rep from its name. It was an interesting comic book, but we're not here to talk about Will Shetterly's book. We're here to talk about my book.
Absolutely.
So there, you could go with Synergy as the number 2 super team of the South, except they operated on a wider basis than just the South. But it was kind of a joke tagline. It worked very well, but it also sort of pointed out the fact that if you want to read about Southern superheroes who aren't idiots, you don't have but one choice. There really wasn't any other option for anybody else.
Now, no. Don't go doing this to me. Okay. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you about the Southern Knights is the artists that you worked with, Butch Geis, Mark Probst. These guys are active independent comics today, taking advantage of a venue that you did not have when you needed a $1,000 comic book. They're working in the crowdfunding arena with comic books. What would it take? And they're doing it rather well too. So I'm thinking, what would it take for at least the 3 of you guys to bring back the Southern Knights, if at least only in like a colored omnibus edition through a crowdfunding effort? Is that something that would even interest you?
Oh yeah, it would thrill me no end. There's been a lot of back and forth. We have nearly resurrected the Knights about 4 times in the last 12 years. But funding has fallen through. This was before the days of Kickstarter that all of this went on. And I've looked at it. I think Kickstarter and the associated crowdfunding things are great ideas. What you need is an artist who can put some sweat equity time into the book, is basically what it comes down to. You've got to present stuff when you're doing your Kickstarter. You've got to have artwork. You've got to have a few pages of story to present or something like that. And unfortunately, the artists I have contact with haven't had the spare time that they could take away from honing work to do a little bit of that sweat equity work. I
was thinking that perhaps you'd be able to make something existing, like a cover like this, and use it as a cover for an omnibus reprint. And then you could have like tiers on there that would say, hey, if we reach this level, then we'll have a pinup by Butch Geist. If we reach this level, we'll have another pinup by Mark Probst. That way they wouldn't have to, it's already done. But that's just my thought.
It's not a bad thought. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we were sort of approaching that. We were in contact with the guys who ran Kamiko and are doing they were doing another project, and we're going to produce on sort of a print on demand active book of Southern Knights reprints. It was going to be two volume omnibus, basically. But the artwork, we don't have the actual artwork anymore. And you can't just take the stuff out of the printed books and reprint it. It doesn't look good. So I ended up sending copies of all the issues up to one of the guys, and he was working diligently scanning and cleaning that artwork up, cleaning up all the pages so that they could be used to make a printing proof. And then I'm unclear on what happened, but there was either a falling out or something happened, and apparently the business went by the wayside, or at least the plans to expand the business went by the wayside. And so unfortunately it never happened. So it's still on the list of things to do. If anybody is out there listening who knows anything about taking printer film, which David Kraft has most of the printer film, if they know anything about taking printer film and turning that into the kind of artwork that could be used for a print-on-demand book or something like that these days, then we would love to hear about it. So it's something I'd like to do.
I would love to push for that. So the PDFs aren't the quality that you'd be able to use for that. Again, I don't know the technical level of what it would be required.
Yeah, and that's what I've been told. There's a reason I was the writer, and that's because I can barely draw stick figures, and my understanding of all of the artistic software and all of the details involved in that, I can scan stuff. Anybody with half a brain, I think, can scan stuff these days, but to get in and use the software and clean all that up and make it so it'll look good when you reprint it, that's beyond me. And it's unfortunately, between having a real job and my current science fiction writing, I don't have time to learn the software either. So if somebody knows anything about that, I would love to hear from them.
Well, I am in touch with enough people who are printing their own books right now that one of them is going to know something, or at least lead us in the right direction. So if I hear anything, I will definitely funnel them your way and get back to you on that.
Excellent.
At some point, though, you got tired of doing comic books.
Yeah, we went through 2 black and white booms and busts, and weathered the first one. And then when the second one hit, it really wiped out a lot of the black and white industry. And the problem, and I understand this. Basically what happened is a lot of other people who had no business producing comic books learned how little money you could get by with doing this, and they would put together mailers during the big huge black and white boom, and they would solicit for a printing of their comic book. And this was back in the days when there were 5 or 6 distributors we worked with. Diamond was still the biggest, but they weren't the only. There was Capital Distribution and
Bradley Franks.
Bud Plant. Pacific was dead by then, but there were several that we worked with. Glenwood, maybe. No, wait, that's a street here in Raleigh. But still, there were several, and these people would solicit for the first issue of their book, and retailers were ordering big numbers because they hoped they'd get their hands on that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 equivalent, or a book that was big at the time, Fish Police #1. It's sort of faded, or Cerebus #1. Any of those books that became really big that skyrocketed in price. So people would get 15, 20,000 issue or copy orders total from the different distributors, and they'd go off and print these things, and they'd show up, and they would be, they'd look like they were put together by a junior high art class or something like that. I mean, they were truly bad comic books, abysmal stuff, bad writing, bad art, bad everything, except that they had a good cover because they had gone to a convention and hired, they'd paid an artist to do a commission. And that's the only piece of artwork they'd sent out was their well done cover by a real artist. Needless to say, all the retailers got stuck with these books. These were books they couldn't sell 12 for $1, but so they were taking a bath on the books. And unfortunately, they decided that the safest thing to do was to stop ordering black and white books. So they would order a few of a first issue, and if it sold out, they'd be great, order half for the second issue. And even books that had been around for a long time, the Southern Knights and the X-Thieves, all predated it. We watched our sales just dwindle, and it became a point that it was just not worth the continued aggravation to try to fight it. We weren't making money, and it was a fight to get the distributor to print stuff up. Dave Kraft actually proposed at one point we were going to do, we solicited for a color double-size issue of the Southern Knights just to test the waters and see what we could do. And he sent out the solicitations, and basically a lot of the advice that was given in the listing, he read to me from the various listings that were there, and they were things like order like a normal Southern Knights issue, maybe less. We're like, really? Seriously?
Yeesh.
Yeah. So we shelved the idea of the color issue, and we ended up running the two different issues. They ran as black and white 2 issues in the regular Southern Knights run. So it was just it was like banging your head against the wall, and eventually you do get tired, and it feels good when you stop hitting your head against the wall. So we stopped.
And at that point, you moved into you being a writer. You still got to get the words out of your body and out of your head. Without a comic book, you started doing science fiction novels.
It took me a long time to do that, actually. For quite a while, I did my storytelling as a role-playing game master, which I'll go flat out and credit D&D for teaching me how to write. I was a game master first, and I learned about storytelling from doing that. Then I went in and did comic books, and then I ended up, by the time we stopped, I had a full-time job again. I'd been forced to stop just writing comic books. It was great for a while when I was able to support myself doing that, but I was working a full-time job, and there was no support in the publishing industry for self-publishing like we had been doing. So I just did role-playing games, and then years later I became a performing storyteller. And finally, with the dawn of the Kindle and the ebooks, I went back to writing. And while I would have been happy to write comic books, I didn't have access to an artist. And so I went into science fiction, which is what I've been doing.
The artist is always the, I've got plenty of ideas for a comic book series, but it's a pesky artist thing that people want you to have on hand.
Yep.
So
I missed that. We lost sound for a minute there.
Yeah, I was going to say, even with science fiction novels, you've got a cover artist of some kind.
You do, and as a matter of fact, my very first cover artist was Mark Probst. He, bluntly put, he owed me some money, and I said, "Hey, do a cover for my book, and I'll let you off." But he wasn't really available for the second book. So we ended up, there are a lot of cover artists out there. They're not that expensive. You can get a good paperback or a good ebook cover or paperback cover for a few $100s, and you really couldn't produce an entire comic book, much less a series of comic books for that kind of cost. So it's comparatively minimal expense. And so I'll go ahead.
So where are you at today with the books? I mean, what would be the newest and brightest thing that people could go out and find your name on, and what would prompt them to want to get into it? And I'm rushing this along because we're in the back of the game room here, and apparently it's going to be used for a game room here real soon.
Okay, I understand. Well, my newest book, which is available through Amazon, is called The Lost Planet. And I've kind of called it my Star Wars, although it does have a galactic empire. It does feature a space war, and it does follow a small group of people who are trying to find a way to defeat this galactic empire. But it is, that's about the closest really commonalities are between it and Star Wars. It's, I'll flat out go ahead and say it's my best book. It's the best book I've written. It is if you like space opera, if you like science fiction adventure, then I think you would really enjoy The Lost Planet. If you're out there listening and you think you might enjoy it, you can go to Amazon. You can download a sample of the book and check it out before you have to think about paying money for it. And if you're part of Kindle Unlimited, if you subscribe, you can just check it out right there and read it. It is
read the whole thing.
Yeah, you can. It's a good, fun science fiction adventure with a couple of young protagonists in their very early 20s who are searching for, a lost planet where they hope to find either a lost race or a lost weapon that they can use to turn back an invasion fleet that is heading towards Earth. There is a lot more to it than that, but it's just you're not going to get hit over the head with any kind of message. There won't be any preaching. It's just a fun adventure story, like I used to write for comics.
That's all we want. You ever thought about putting the Southern Nights into a novel-length adventure?
Yes, I have. I've considered that very often, and I actually even decided if I ever did that, I was going to say that they were being published by Artless Publications or something like that, because there would be no art, and it would be kind of a play on the fact of Artless being that it sucks. But I know, but I have seriously considered that, and I have not abandoned that idea, particularly when you look out online and you look at there is a big research. There are a lot of people writing superhero novels because they can't get their hands on artists to draw them or whatever reason, but there are a lot of them, and some of them are really quite good.
What a great segue for me to remind people that Critical Blast Publishing has the first book in the Bulletproof series, Bulletproof Origins, in hardcover from Stephen J. Mitchell. This is available on Amazon. It's our first young adult novel. It follows the anthology that I told you about earlier, Gods and Services, and it also predates what we're finally reading for, which is our The Devil You Know anthology, which is going to involve people who have encounters with old friends. I'm looking forward to seeing that one. A professional writer, you've kind of got an inside track on probably getting into that series. Henry, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and sorry for all the technical glitches here. The good thing, my wife got to see all the technical glitches I put up with, and now I don't have to convince her I need a new computer. She's actually seen that I need one.
Well, if you need any other support, I will support you wholeheartedly in that quest.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We will find out about the test. I want to talk with you again about getting the Southern Knights into comic book series again.
I would
I
love
think
to
the time
appear.
is right for that kind of thing. Great. Thank you again, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Bye. And bye, everybody who is watching.
Bye.